Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. My guest today is Ryan McGuigan. After losing his long-term relationship and the career that had defined him, Ryan found himself lost, trying to rebuild his life right at the beginning of his 40s. So welcome to you, Ryan.
Thanks very much, Philip.
So before everything changed, you were living in Ireland. What was your identity tied to at that point in your life? Who were you?
Well, I grew up in Northern Ireland, and I guess the start of the story really is growing up in Ireland with the rain and the cold and the cloud. And I felt that was really affecting my mood. You know, you hear of this sad seasonal affective disorder or whatever. And I think it is a thing. The further north you go, your mood is affected. I really noticed the difference on a good day when the sun was out. If I was on holiday, we went to Australia back in 2006, 20 years ago now, which is a bit mad. I seem to be saying that more and more these days, 20 years ago. But yeah, I think just from a really early age in life, I had a desire to move somewhere to the sun. But at that stage, it was more like a someday. I wouldn't say that was my identity, but that was, the underlying current for everything that happened really in the past 20 years. So later then, in 2010, I qualified as a deep tissue massage therapist. I had previously wanted to be a physiotherapist, but for one reason or another, it didn't work out. I didn't want to have to work in a hospital. I wanted to work more in like a sports arena. So I went back to Belfast and qualified in massage therapy. Basically built a business from absolutely nothing. I started working from home straight after I qualified, so no employment, just straight into self-employment. Started to generate some customers, and things were going well over the first 18 months or so, to the point that I felt I could go all in, if you like, and move from working from the spare bedroom to a city centre office in Belfast. So that was really the start of things. That was the first clue for me that things were getting real. Things, I could do this. I could actually make a living from this.
And so so your business was becoming a success. And how did that make you feel then, in terms of fulfillment and where you wanted to be in your life?
Yeah, I felt things were going from strength to strength. My reputation was building amongst my clients and in Belfast in general. I had a little Google review page, which was getting more and more Google reviews. I remember hitting my first 50, then my first 100, then over 200. I started believing my own hype a little bit at that stage. The client feedback was amazing. It made me feel really appreciated. It made me feel like I did have a purpose and I was making a contribution in the world. And a lot of those clients actually became my friends. We caught up with each other's lives, and there was a deep integration, if you like, between the business and who I was and who I was becoming. It was very deeply entrenched.
And then also you had, and you were in a relationship as well. That was, I guess, alongside your business.
Yes, I met a lady in 2014. So I was doing the business 3 or 4 years by that stage. We dated for a couple of years or whatever, and then moved in together. So I made the trip out of Belfast and gave myself a nice 1-hour commute each direction. So yeah, things in most relationships, the way it goes, you have your honeymoon period and everything's rosy and super in the beginning. And life at that stage really couldn't have been better. I had the business, and the business was growing. I had better finances, if you like. I was able to have little upgrades in life. I was able to go on better holidays or more often. I lived right across the road from the golf course where the lady lived, where we lived. So I took up the opportunity to do that, and life was just all hunky dory, you might say.
So you mentioned, the weather being perhaps a negative factor, but when did you start to think that something felt a bit off then?
Well, I kind of became a victim of my own success. I was getting busier in the business. I was at one stage then working to capacity. But the thing is, with deep tissue massage, it gets into your hands. I started getting sore fingers, sore thumbs, sore wrists, and I just noticed that when I was that busy, and as I was getting older, it was just taking more and more out of me. I was getting home in the evenings, and I was just fit for absolutely nothing. Sometimes falling asleep on the bus as well. So there were signs in the beginning. Well, not in the beginning, but there were signs sneaking in that this was going to start becoming a problem at some stage. So I did try to manage it then as the pains got worse and as my energy levels were not recovering as quickly as they used to, let's say. It was becoming more obvious that I was going to need a plan B at some stage. I tried to manage it with reducing my longer treatments. So I used to offer 90 minutes. I cut those all down to 75 maximum. I was working 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, off Wednesday to rest, and then Thursday, Friday. And that Wednesday in the middle was worth its weight in gold. I couldn't have done 5 days a week ever. Not that I did do 5 days a week, but that Wednesday was absolutely non-negotiable. And then even when I cut down to Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so I never even had 2 days in a row. I always had a recovery day straight after a work day. But it was just accumulating in me as time was going on.
So things are not as great as they initially were with your business. And, how was everything else in your life at that point?
Everything else was fine, the relationship was pretty strong. We had our normal ups and downs, but, who doesn't kind of thing. We then actually got engaged. That would have been 2018 or 19. So we were together maybe 4 years and we got engaged. And again, everything was just tickety-boo. Although I would say that as the pains were setting into my hands and it was taking more out of me, I definitely noticed that I was keeping up with all of that more out of obligation than desire. A lot of times I felt I was going through the motions. And there was definitely days, I was wishing my life away, literally wishing my life away. I was in the office, had a heavy day, could see heaviness ahead of me in the rest of the day, and I just wanted to go home. I was just like, this is all getting too much.
So did you feel how was your mental health? Was that beginning to suffer?
Not on the grand scheme of things, no. It was just more a case that I was going through the motions. I wasn't happy. But my life looked really good on paper. I was into Facebook a lot for my business and in my personal life. And, if you were looking at my Facebook profile with foreign holidays and golfing a couple of times a week and the odd time I would, screenshot my customer reviews or whatever. And our relationship was good. We were going on holidays. We ran together. We did things together, So from the outside looking in, everything was fantastic. And at that stage, really, the only problem was that I was suppressing this discontent for the weather and for the business that was otherwise perfect, but taking too much out of me now.
So did you feel it wasn't sustainable? What if we're getting to a kind of point of no return, or you've got to change something? How did that happen?
Well, as I say, I managed it for as long as I could. And even with the reduction in the heaviness and the reduction in days, I decided that something's going to have to give here. I'd already been doing it for maybe 10, 11, 12 years. And the prospect of even another 5 years was out of the question. So I began to research then about what I would do instead. I'm fairly self-aware. I've got a fairly analytical, problem-solving type of mind. So I knew some of the things that this new thing was going to have. I wanted to continue to be able to help people. I wanted it to be online and location independent. If I was going to be leaving the country at some stage, I wanted the business to be able to come with me and be very flexible, because I was very aware that anytime I was on holiday or sick, on holiday, let's say if I was in Australia for 2 or 3 weeks visiting family, that I wasn't earning. All my bills were waiting for me at home, but I wasn't earning while I was away, and I was always conscious in the back of my mind that I needed to get back for that. So I knew also then that it needed to be more sustainable on my body. So the research went on, and I was able to rule a few things out. I suppose I thought about less labour-intensive massage therapies first of all, but ruled those out quickly because it was going to anchor me to the same place again, the same way that my present business was. I also qualified in Reiki with a view to doing distance Reiki. That's a thing. So I could have done that online. It would have been absolutely zero energy for me, but I sort of just thought that the chances of making that a sustainable actual practice were slim. So I was ruling things out and going along, but I didn't feel like my thinking was going round in circles, or I didn't think that, I was putting things off or making excuses or anything. It genuinely was what I would describe as healthy thinking and healthy research, but I just hadn't found the right thing just yet.
So the thought of, you decided then that you wanted to do something other than massage work because physically it was having a toll on you. You also decided that you perhaps wanted to be more non-location dependent. So if you wanted to go and live in the sun, you could do. But did you have issues around, your identity was alongside the business that you built? Did you have any problems around if you weren't a massage, if you weren't focused on providing massage as a means of making a living, what was your identity? I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty calculated way of looking for a new role, but I just wondered if you had any issues around, identity.
I wouldn't say that my identity was tied specifically to massage, but I did see myself as a person who helped people with how they feel. In the massage days, it was like with their pain and stress and stuff. My identity issues really cropped up then when I started having this misalignment in my relationship. So what I felt was just the normal ups and downs of a relationship then turned into something that I felt was a wee bit more fundamentally wrong. So, we did what people usually do. We talked about it and we did all of that. But eventually, I had to make the decision basically that we would be better off splitting up. So we cancelled the wedding and we continued to live together for a while I looked for somewhere else to live and whatnot, and also to sort of give both of us a sort of a buffer period financially so that we weren't just going off a cliff. We were both going to be managing separate households, whereas obviously we had been sharing all the bills and all of that up until then. So the time came then when I actually found a suitable place to go, and I use the word suitable very loosely. Basically just to balance my finances. I ended up moving into a shared house in Belfast. So my cost of living stayed roughly the same because I didn't have to pay for the monthly bus from where I lived to where the business is. So I went into a shared house, and it was just the strangest thing because I knew the relationship had run its course. I knew that we were both better off. We tried, and as far as I was concerned, there was no stones left unturned. But I just hadn't anticipated the feeling of severance from life. It felt like the world was continuing around me completely normal, but I was now floating in space.
So how old are you now then? You're what, in your 30s?
I was 39. I was literally months from my 40th birthday.
So you're about to be 40. Your relationship, or you've called your wedding off. You're living in a shared house. You're I don't know if at this point you were still continuing with the massage work or whether you'd stopped doing that. So your life essentially, was turned upside down, I guess. And how did that make you feel in terms of being almost 40? Is this where you thought you would be?
Well, for want of a better description, Philip, things just came crashing down around me at that stage. I felt this severance, as I say, floating in space. I knew that I didn't want the relationship back. That wasn't the point. It was just that I felt this sense of complete failure, of approaching 40, of where I thought I would be at that stage and where I found myself. I went from being a part of something and, a household and the whole life on Facebook thing. And then I went into a shared house, kicking the ass of 40 with 3 strangers who were all in their 20s, obviously at different stages in their life. So the shame of that was mental. The embarrassment, outside of my nearest and dearest, anybody that wasn't on a need to know basis, I didn't share this with. I was still in the massage business because I was still researching. I didn't have a better alternative to go to at that stage.
So what was the shame based on then? Was it your expectations of what other people might think?
Yeah, exactly. That was a big part of it. How this appeared to other people. So I guess some of my identity was tied into this image that I had of, this relationship and this wedding and this future together and this nice house we lived in, which was across the road from the golf course. And I just had this pretty nice lifestyle of holidays with the two of us and golfing a couple of times a week. And then everything just went snap, up in smoke. So the failure and the shame and the embarrassment of being in that situation was the first thing. As I said, went to a lot of effort really to hide it and to perform because I still had to turn up at work. My clients expected a certain version of me, which was, the usual positive and enthusiastic and sort of high vibration type of guy. And here I was leaving a shared house, coming in, having to pretend like none of that was happening and continue to be that person that they expected me to be, rather than the person that I was feeling I was inside, who was this broken, young boy or something. So that was a difficult period, but the shame and the embarrassment then also turned into fear and anxiety, overthinking, catastrophizing, questions of my future, dating life. Like, I hadn't been on a date in like 10 years, and things had changed. You've got your apps and all that jazz now. And well, it was completely out of the question for me at that stage to be thinking about dating, because who was going to date a 39-year-old living in a shared house? I can laugh about it now, but it was not a laughing matter at the time.
So what did you do then to you're in this, sounds like you're in a very low, dark place. How did you cope, and how did you get yourself out of that?
Well, I'd always been into the journaling end of things. I'd always sort of classed myself as a self-aware type of guy. I was just trying to get things out of my mind and onto paper and sort of look at it from the outside in and all of this. And that helped to an extent. I was also reading, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, just trying to get a better understanding of my situation and what other people do in these situations. I ended up going to counselling then, and had a few sessions with a counsellor who then gave me some language to put to it. So he said then that I was suffering from this a loss of identity, that a lot of my self-worth was tied up in this relationship and the image of the relationship, and what being in that relationship meant to me, which was normal life, quote unquote. The things that you would be expected to be doing and have achieved by that sort of time in life.
Did that help, to speak to that person, and did it help put perspective on how you were feeling? Did it help give you some, able to try and move forward a bit more positively?
Yeah, it helped, as I said, to give it language. And I talk a lot about my analytical mind. My analytical mind could understand it a lot better from the way he had framed it. But it didn't change my lived experience. I still felt the shame. I still felt the embarrassment. I still had all the fear and all the anxiety and all that fun stuff going on in my head. And it was going on in between this 6 inches between my ears. But I just felt that this 6 inches between my ears was this tiny little bubble. And then there was the expanse of the universe outside that, where everything was going on normally, and everything else was sort of connected. And I just felt really isolated in this little 6-inch sphere of chaos.
And what were did you have any, I've suffered from some anxiety in the past, and it's very difficult to sleep. You find yourself very sleep deprived, depressed, anxious. What sort of symptoms of this loss of identity were you feeling?
Well, the worst thing was the overthinking and the just not being able to rest. I couldn't have a quiet time inside my head. I was always pulled back to, how the flip am I going to improve my situation here? How am I going to get out of this? How am I going to make enough money to be able to afford, a proper rent and not in a shared house? How am I going to be able to make a good impression on a member of the fair sex? All these questions were going around in my head, and there were no answers as far as I was concerned. Everything was just swirling around constantly, and I just basically felt like shit all the time.
So what happened next then? I know you made a decision to leave the cold and the wet and the damp. but what did you, how did you get yourself from this situation, which people listening, I'm sure many people will relate to and have felt in a similar situation? What did you do then to get to where you are now?
Well, my research to get myself out of this rain and cold and all the rest of it, get myself out of this heavy work that was just taking too much from me. My research led me to a specific meditation course. So it ticked all the boxes for me in terms of the practical things. I was going to be able to continue to help people. It was online, so I could be anywhere and do it. And also, it wasn't going to take so much out of me. It was just going to be like we are now, talking. There was no physical effort involved. So this guided process then basically changed everything for me. And I have to say, it was a surprise to me that it did. So all the practical boxes were ticked, and the course materials were based around self-discovery. Basically, the meditations were about self-discovery and self-sourcing the solutions and the answers to your challenges. So that's what everything was based around, and I really loved that ethos. I said I can continue to help people with this. It'll do everything that I wanted to do, and great. So I signed up to the course, and during the training then, I was receiving the meditations that I would then be delivering to my clients. And, when I signed up to this course, I was pretty much saying to myself, right, I'll test this, but it's for other people. It's not for me. I'll just see if this is going to be valuable to other people. Because, as I say, I was very self-aware, journaling, reading, counselling, all of this. I really thought I had my own number, that I had nothing really to learn about myself or my own situation. So in one of the early sessions of the training, I can't really describe how much of a just flick of the switch sort of moment this was. But during the process, I was really able to access a deeper part of me. It was below the analytical mind. It was below all the stories I had been telling myself or that other people had told me over the years, and which I had taken on as true. All the conditioning, all the expectations, all the other people's opinions, all of that just right underneath it. And I was able to access what was true for me. And what was true for me, or the most poignant thing that I had to realize at that time, was that my circumstances were absolutely irrelevant. My relationship status was absolutely irrelevant. Even my successful business was absolutely irrelevant. What was important was inside me, not outside me. It was my character. I came to the conclusion that I was inherently a decent person, that my heart was in the right place. I genuinely wanted the best for people. And that's what mattered. And in that moment, as I was able to put language to this was a feeling, first of all, before it was, developed into language. So there's like a journaling part of the practice as well. And my hand could not write fast enough as the words were coming to me. What I had just realized about, your self-worth and your self-esteem should come from those internal values and your morals and that type of thing, not whether you're married or not whether you live in a shared house or a mansion, not whether you're cycling a bike to work or driving a Ferrari. All of that stuff was absolutely irrelevant.
So for people listening to this, Ryan, who don't really know anything about meditation and think it's a bit kind of far out, nothing that would help them at all, and from what you're saying, this fundamentally changed the way that you thought about yourself and the way that you thought about your identity, and really helped you. I wonder if you could, in kind of layman's terms, just describe, what that actually means. What is it? Because I think some people think they have to go into some sort of trance, and suddenly some divine voice comes and tells you something. I'm sure. What does it mean on a more practical level, so people can understand?
I understand that way of thinking, because that's exactly the way that I went into the course. I had used meditation over the years for relaxation. If I could turn myself away and I had a spare 15 minutes, I would put on a relaxation massage or a relaxation meditation. And the odd time I would have used it for better sleep. So for me, those experiences were pleasant, but lacking substance, if you like. I did try to empty my mind for 10 minutes a few times, which was absolutely impossible. And also 10 minutes felt like an hour. So that's what a lot of people say to me now. I can't do that meditation thing, and they either find it boring or they just can't quiet their mind. But with this, it was different, because at the beginning, you set a focus for the meditation. So if there's something that you want to focus on or something that you want to take away from the meditation, you set that in the beginning, and that just frames the whole thing ahead of it, which is really good. And then you're not left with huge silences where your mind just runs wild.
So can you give us an example? So, for example, if you were trying to look at a new career, for example, or could that be your focus to base your meditation on?
It was, yes. You could basically anything that you need the truth about, Philip, this can be used for it. I would caveat that and say that the answer has to be already in you. So when I was doing the practice, I knew I wanted to leave Ireland. But I got this, I went through the process, and it was about sort of envisaging something that you wanted to achieve. So that's where my mind went, was living in the sun. And I was able to set that focus of completing the course. That's what it was about, actually. What do you want to happen after you complete this course? So it wasn't exactly about the sun. It was finding my truth about where I wanted this to lead after the course. So where my mind went was getting qualified, building up a client base, building this successful business, and then being able to move to the sun. And I just had full body goosebumps. It was almost like I had taken drugs, like ecstasy tablets or something. My body was tingling, and just this sense of euphoria for this thing. So that was able then to confirm my already need to leave the country, but also it gave me an idea of how fulfilling this whole journey would be for me. And it allowed me then to have that vision and make a plan to work towards it.
So essentially, you're visualizing the problem. Let's call it the problem, or what you're looking to resolve, and then is it putting your mind into a state whereby you can, think around that and look at what else you want to achieve, and is it kind of freeing up your mind to think about how you might do that alternatively to in an alternative manner to how you might not think about that if you're just quite stressed and not open to it?
Yes. Well, the meditative state, what it actually does, Not that I would speak to my clients in this much detail, but what it actually does is slows down the part of the mind, the analytical mind, which is doing all the analysis, all the thinking. But that analysis and that thinking is always filtered through your lived experience and the conditioning that you've had over the years. So that might include how you feel about yourself and what you think you're worth. So, if you're trying to think through a problem, but you have an underlying problem with self-belief or self-confidence, you're going to arrive at a certain answer. But with this, the analytical mind kind of goes to sleep and you access a part of the mind that is more creative, more imaginative, more intuitive. And I would describe it just as accessing what's actually true for you beyond the conditioning, beyond the stories, other people's expectations, the roles that you've picked up over the years, the responsibilities, all of that weighs on your decision making and the choices that you make. So for my case, the way I've just explained it to you there, I got below all the stories, all the expectations, all the roles, all the demands, all of that shit. I got right under it and I got to the absolute heart of the matter for me, which was that doesn't matter. But I didn't even realize that I had to realize that. That was an unexpected realization for me. My analytical mind had gone to town on it 100 times. It couldn't land anywhere. It was overthinking. It was fear-based. It was inner critic-based. It was imposter syndrome-based. It was just concerned about everything that was outside of me, when what really needed to happen was I needed to find what was true in my heart in the deepest. Yeah.
How do you quiet that voice though? Because if you're in, and you described yourself, if you're in a state where you can't quiet your mind and you're just constantly going over, failure or shame or whatever it is, how do you go from that state? And I guess the answer is go and see somebody like yourself. How do you quiet your mind so that you do actually find, quiet all the analytical voices and comparing yourself to other people, etc., and your lived experience? How do you do that? Is that through working with someone like you who talks you through it? Is it listening to, relaxing music? I just think people listening to this podcast, I guess a lot of them will be in a similar situation and think, well, I didn't know what meditation was. This sounds like, from what Ryan's saying, this could really be something that could help. But I guess I'm just trying to, if you could just help understand, how, without going in, without delivering the course that you went on, what is it that helps you do that?
The crux of the matter, Philip, is the guidance. It's just a really expertly put together structure whereby the cadence that I speak at, it's not too fast, not too slow. It doesn't give anybody a chance to wander away off somewhere. All they have to do is follow the sound of my voice. After we've set the intention for the meditation, then I will just guide them into a deeper and deeper sense of relaxation. So, you'll have some breathing exercises, you'll have some things to concentrate on, you'll have some things, I'll ask some questions, I'll ask you to go some places in your mind's eye. So at all times, your mind is occupied with what I'm asking you to focus on. And what I'm asking you to focus on is very deliberate. It's, there's not a word or a sentence in there that doesn't have a meaning or a job to do. So we spend a good 8 to 10 minutes at the start to get people just in this rhythm. And what it's actually doing is changing your brainwave frequency from a higher state to a lower state. And we get you in that little sweet spot of you're still conscious, you're not sleeping. So It's just gets you in that little groove, but it's all about the guidance, really. I'm sure you know yourself, there's so many different types of meditation out there, depending on the job that they do. Some of them are just simply relaxation. Some of them are simply just, the silence and try and quiet your mind things. People like me, analytical mind, problem solver, tendency to overthink if I'm given the opportunity. I cannot deal with that silence. That silence will not last very long. I will fill that silence with something, and it usually won't be good if I'm not in a good place. So the guidance is everything. There's a bit of nice music in the background as well. And then we get to a certain point where the relaxation part is accomplished, and then we'll get to the nitty-gritty into the proper body of the meditation, where I'll ask those questions. But if it was you, Philip, and you said you had a problem with your career, you wanted to change your career, I wouldn't get you in there and just say, what do you want to do about your career? The questions come from deeper. So you never realize what you need to realize until you realize it. And that's exactly the way it's been for me. And it's been for all the same for my clients as well, bar none.
But thank you, because I think that's demystified for a lot of people, what it is, what meditation is. And obviously you are an example of this working for you, because you now, you operate from Portugal, and, you have the son, and you've built a successful business, and, you've moved on from that period in your life not that long ago where it was very bleak. So for men listening to this, who are perhaps in the same situation or can relate to some things you've been talking about, but just don't know what to do, what would you recommend? Would you recommend they try meditation? And I mean, I guess you said there are lots of different types. I guess you just need to try and, how would you select who you would contact in the first place?
For people that are in the same situation as me, I would say do whatever you have to do to find what's true for you. If you're in a certain situation, if you know that something is misaligned in your life, whether that is your job or your business or your relationship or where you live, whatever it happens to be, then I think it's important to be brave enough to face that and admit where there's problems. And I'm not saying go and burn down your entire life down, because you might look at a problem and see how to improve it at least. So I think being honest with yourself about what's going right and what's going wrong, first of all, and then accessing the deeper part of you that is beyond the analytical mind is kind of the differentiator for me. You can use other meditations if you wished, but they won't have the same type of guidance. If anyone needed to sort of get a taste of my type of style of meditation, I have a free practice, which is on my website, which is at ryanpaulmcguigan.com. So you can sign up there, and for about 30 minutes of a practice, you'll walk away with a nugget of truth, which you can use over and over again as well with different focuses. So I think for anybody who's in a similar situation to me can at least get the ball rolling with accessing beneath that analytical mind, which in a lot of cases keeps us safe and is a very useful and powerful tool to navigate life. But on the other hand, also, it keeps us stuck. It keeps us afraid. It keeps us overcautious.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ryan. Well, thanks for giving us your insights and being open about your experience. I'm sure a lot of people will connect to what you're saying. We'll put your website address in the notes as well. And yes, I guess if you want to try it, if you want to find out what Ryan's talking about, then you've got a 30-minute free tool exercise for them to do. But thank you, Ryan. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Philip. I enjoyed that.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to listen to Ryan's free 30-minute meditation, visit his website, ryanpaulmcguigan.com. To help raise the profile of the podcast, it really helps if you can review and follow the show on your chosen podcast platform. And please do share it with your networks and people you think might benefit from listening. If you have a story to share, then do contact me through the website mid-lifemen.com.